Who's been into the Moodle and had a look at the resources?
Yes, I have, Colin. It's Sarah.
Sarah, and how did you find the ebook format? Do you find that quite, I mean, hopefully not too paternalising, but hopefully quite systematic and quite open?
Yeah, it was quite good, actually. I enjoyed it. Well,
fabulous.
As enjoyable as you could get.
Yeah, for study, I agree. And look, when I thought about this course, I thought long and hard. I thought I'm working with time poor people. I'm working with people who want impact and bang for their buck. So the best thing I can do is present this material in ways that are going to be digested the same way every week. So I'm going to follow the 5E or the E5 from Bribey, the model in presenting the material. So we'll go through the engage, the explain, the explore, the explain, the elaborate, and the evaluate stages each week. And in doing so, we're going to model the curriculum, the science curriculum, the stuff that we're actually studying. So we're going to become our own little lab rats, if you like, so to speak. And you see when I get onto the website in a minute and talk a little bit about the Moodle and the course and why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm open to feedback because I'm happy to change things as we go through. And I certainly don't espouse to be an authority and know the best way. But this is the way I thought we'd start. So let's begin the weekly Zooms. I'm going to put up an ebook each week, and it's got the 5 distinct chapters. It'll be the same every week. So by the end of the course, you'll be sick of the 5 E's, but at least you'll know what to do when you see one. But the weekly Zoom format, we're going to follow the same format too. So each week I'll set up 3 subsections, a Q&A forum. I'll talk about the weekly tasks, and then probably the big one that you guys are going to want most is going to be the discussion about assessment and how to unpack all of that. Now, this stuff that I'm talking about now comes from a model here from Betty Collis, a Dutch educator. And she's put together what she calls the contributing student model. Now, we're in a blended environment, so it's expected that you don't just lurk around there in the shadows, and though what we call legitimate peripheral participation is lurking, and it's quite legitimate. But what we want to do is flush you out and get your ideas out there too. So we're trying to go for a contributory model. And this model, as you can see, starts down here in the bottom of this little axis corner here, and it's about an information repository, and that's our Moodle. And there's little or no human communication in there, and the content is organised for instruction, but it's just a big lad bag of stuff. Now you're going to go through and you will find some things much more interesting than others, and that's quite all right with me. This is your course. You pluck out of this course what you value, and as a result, by the end, you're going to produce assessment that reflects you and that you actually value. So as we go up the vertical axis, we can see that we go from little or no communication, we go to enriched communication within the course, and ultimately by the end of the course, you'll be communicating as professional science educators. Now, I really want to say at this point that this course is not about science per se. It's about teaching science. So we're going to jump over that fence as often as we can, where we try to provide some practical examples, some investigations that are doable. But in the Moodle this week, I started with a little discussion about how pre-service teachers actually rate their confidence in science, and people generally think they're pretty confident at teaching science, which is great. But when they get into a school setting, most people realise that the school doesn't have a science lab. They realise that they're teaching in a setting where they generally don't even have a wet area to conduct any experiments. So science often becomes, watch the teacher do this. So we're going to try and avoid that. We're going to try and come up with science that is situated and contextual. It's not just content, it's context. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we go through. So we're going to move from content. Our web page has got content on our Moodle. So then we're going to start to fool around with that in our assessment items. We're going to look at pre-structured content within courses that you're going to teach yourself. And then you're going to look at co-constructed content, and meaning that you share through the discussion board and that you will essentially develop as assessment items 1 and 2. So Betty Collis would be proud of us. She died recently, actually. She's a lovely woman. I've met her several times. And she died young, unfortunately, but she'd be very proud of the fact that we're keeping her model alive and actually adopting it as the way we chat, the way we talk about science in this course. I'm going to start from the Q&A. The Q&A is pretty quiet at the moment, and every week I go there to find out what's bugging you. And when I find out what's bugging you, I try to put together some resources and address it in the Zoom session. So can I urge you, please, to get into the Q&A? It doesn't matter how silly you think it is. Make me work. That's what I'm here for. It's 6 o'clock. We'd all rather be somewhere else, doing something else, but we're here. So let's really make it count. Anyone not used a forum before in these courses in the Moodle? Anyone unsure how to do that? Do I need to put up resources to indicate how to use it? No? Good. Silence. One thing I want to stress, though, at this stage is when you're responding to a post on the forum, put your title in. Okay? If someone's written north is south, then your response will be south is west. So put that in the subject bar so that if you say something really important or you say something quite memorable or something strategic, as often happens in online learning, people know where to go and find your comment again, because if it's all the one title or the one subject, it's very hard to sort the good material from the less helpful material. But we start off by looking at pedagogical frameworks in science. And look, I'm not going to do all the talking. I'm just going to get us going. But we very much talk about inquiry and constructivist teaching. And then we move into a discussion of representations by around about the elaboration stage, I think, of the week. So we move from the notion of constructivist approaches. You're all familiar with Vygotsky? Anyone not familiar with Vygotsky? Anyone like to say they are? Yes? Right, can we find someone to speak there, just to make sure that we're still hearing each other? Lev Vygotsky, anyone like to tell us who he is?
Yes, he's a theorist.
A theorist of what?
A few things: zone of proximal development, sociocultural theory.
Brilliant. You're a fan, Nicole?
I am.
Fantastic. He is brilliant, isn't he? And what nationality was he? Anyone know? Not very popular, unfortunately, in the Western world. He was Russian.
Russian?
Yeah. And when did he publish his seminal works? Is he a recent guy or?
Wasn't it around the 1960s, 70s?
Actually, go back 50 years, 1921.
Wow.
This is the problem with living in the Balkans. Things get out of there pretty slow. They take a long time to get, it's 4 years after the revolution. So his wonderful work was suppressed for many, many years and often released. And you're absolutely right, 1970-71 is the seminal date when he was discovered and absolutely slapped all over the front pages of Education Everywhere. But he's a brilliant man for many reasons, as Nicole pointed out. And of course his ZPD is Zone of Proximal Development. And when we take that, we're really talking about constructivist teaching. And this is what science, the Australian curriculum science, is all about. Taking constructionism and imposing it in a scientific framework. So for those of you who do teach constructively, you create that zone. And let's face it, there's three basic roles you have as a teacher. One, you're the sage on the stage where you stand at the front and you orchestrate, you conduct the room. The second one, you're the meddler in the middle where you've set them a task and you're running around getting them down to the task, getting them working, working out the misconceptions, laying out the cognitive schema. And then when all of that's happening beautifully, you become the guide on the side where you sit down beside those students and you work with the ones who are having trouble. Of course, you'll go past the ones who are doing really well and feed them and give them positive strokes. But by and large, the guide on the side is that zone that you work in, that Vygotsky would be very proud of, that you're working with an individual learner in their differentiated zone. And that's the whole theory of ZPD. Well, Dennis Goodrum has taken that to the Australian curriculum. And in 2010, he was commissioned by the Australian government to come up with a science curriculum that reflected an inquiry process. And that's why we're here doing what we're doing. We're getting familiar with Dennis's work. He took 2 years to put together the new Australian curriculum in science. He had a whole cast of people, cast of thousands working for him. But basically what they came up with was the inquiry model. And essentially that's what we're going to talk about as our theoretical framework. There are many others. There are many forms of inquiry. But believe it or not, even the inquiry model, even though it's the core of the Australian curriculum, a recent survey showed that just a little over 60% of schools have adopted it as a way of teaching science. So there's still a lot of old skeptics out there, and I'll use the term old, I belong to that generation, a lot of white-haired dotties who are basically saying the only way to teach science is through content. Okay, Dennis Goodrum is a no-hair dotty. If anyone's seen a picture of Dennis, he's actually lost his hair. But his basic proposition is that, you know, science is there. The best way to teach science is inquiry in an authentic context. So this week we've got some outcomes that we want to address. We've got some key terms. And the obvious take-home is know what they are from this week. Okay. Now, the inquiry model focuses on misconceptions. Let's get into it and have a quick look at it. To get you all started, I actually asked you to subscribe to Science by Doing. Has everyone done that? Or anyone having trouble doing that?
It took me a while to actually get approved, like by going on and trying to be as a teacher. It was just once it emailed me trying to actually get the email back then.
Yeah. And
the link didn't work properly, so.
But you persevered, Kylie, and
it's finally come through yesterday, so.
Have you been on to have a look at things?
Not yet.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of professional learning resources in there. And look, I just swear by them. There are downloadable CD packages. And look, they're 63 megabytes large. They're large, so you'll need a good internet. But what they do is they give you interactions. You can actually sit in a classroom and practice questioning students. There's a whole range of wonderful items in there, and I'll point them out to you as we go. Now, one criticism I get from students sometimes teaching this course is that Science by Doing is essentially a senior, well, not senior, but middle school science program. And my response is to remind you that as a primary teacher, you're actually registered to teach up to the end of year 9. As an early childhood teacher, you're registered to teach up to the end, up to and including year 3. So often when we see ourselves as a certain kind of teacher, it's better to be teacher plus plus. It's better to be that little bit flexible. And also the Science by Doing units, they can be, you know, what we call backward chained. They can be brought back to a different year level and adapted for use there. But the most important thing is he's got lots of fun little science tasks in there, and that's what, you know, really what I wanted to expose you to and help you see. He's got a unit there on science and using toys. He's got amazing units on biological science, earth science, and they're all easy to pluck activities out of and incorporate into your own classes. So please do have a look at that, and we will be referring to that throughout the semester as we go through. The second thing I've asked you to do is have a look at the Moodle orientation. I won't do it here. It's there. It's a video on the very first page, and it takes you through and explains how the Moodle site works. Do have a look at that. It explains the 5Es approach, and it all explains also how that links to the assessment tasks. So we'll use our time here more for talking if we can, rather than looking at the video that you can view on your own time. So please, if you haven't had a look at it, do. And hopefully the Moodle will make a lot more sense to you. So we had a couple of tasks this week, and we talked about where is science, and we know that science, like everything, has become a subject of the media. David Attenborough, when I think of science, I think of David Attenborough. You know, it'd be a sad day when he dies. Comics, we've got science fiction, movies and TV, time and space, Harry Potter, magic, mystics. We've got the pseudoscience. We've got everyday life. We've got a lot of talk in Townsville at the moment about how full our dam is. What happens to bread when it falls butter side down? Okay? Does it land butter side down? Drought, flood, cyclone, seasons, families. You know, the old dad where pull my finger. Wow, what happens? Okay, is that science or something else? Families also provide scientific explanations. So science, unfortunately, is a victim of a lot of misconception. And misconceptions, of course, sit at the basis of the inquiry process. When we sit down with a student in the inquiry process, our goal is not to say, tell me what you know, sorry, you're wrong. Our goal is to say, tell me what you know. Okay, you understand what the student knows. You help the student construct their knowledge framework. So what you do is you look at that framework and you use some diagnostic tools and you look at where that framework may be going wrong, okay, in terms of its knowledge base and its schema. And often we encounter this. I remember one, Brett McAvoy, a lovely Seventh-day Adventist lad, and there's no way that Brett would ever agree that the Earth was, evolution is the source of the evolution of the Earth. He was a creation scientist kid, and he said, sir, it's an entertaining theory, it makes rational sense, but really, I know God created the Earth in 7 days. No matter what I did, I couldn't get that misconception changed with Brett. It was a really, really interesting engagement. I came to respect his position. because he interrogated it. He put it through all the notions of falsification, and to his understanding, it still didn't meet the criteria. Faith-based curricula was a big issue for him. So we can look at this, families, churches, society, misconceptions. And the inquiry process says to the teacher, jump in, discover the misconception, help reconstruct or deconstruct the student's understanding, and then help reconstruct it along the lines of science through the investigative process. So that's really what we're doing. And we know here from our little diagram here that science is one of the 7 core understandings or underpinnings of the curriculum. And it's also underpinned by a whole range of generic capabilities, which we'll talk about as we go through in the course. And look at literacy, we'll look at science literacy, we'll look at technology. We do a week on STEM, if such a thing actually exists. So I don't really want to talk about the slide too much, other than to say that it's much more than giving students opportunities to inquire about things. When we look at this diagram, table 1, there are forms of inquiry. You may not think you do use inquiry, teacher, but there's actually a thing called closed inquiry, where the teacher poses a question, the teacher designs how the question will be answered, and the teacher then ultimately provides the ultimate conclusion. So the students are a little passive in this model, but it's still very much inquiry. So if you're doing that, okay, think about how you may move along this curve towards a more open inquiry method. Ultimately, where we get to the situation where we've got students posing a question. Now that means we've got some engaged students. We've got students proposing methods, investigations and solutions. And then we've got students justifying and evaluate which solution works the best. And this is a model of open inquiry. And there's a whole range of things sitting between these two ears. There's a nose, a face, some eyebrows. There's a whole range of variations here on inquiry. So when we look at that, we can talk about inquiry as a whole range of pedagogical tools. Concept mapping, brainstorming, a thing called envoys, where you put students in group of 5 and one member of the group leaves a group and goes to another group, for instance, which may be talking about reptiles, reptile food chains. So 5 kids get together, and then they bring that back to their original group, and that's their knowledge base. That's what they had to their original group's discussion. Gallery walks, a very physical, kinesthetic thing. Jigsaw groups, again, breaking into small groups, reconstructing and creating the group knowledge. And predict, observe, explain, POE, which is a big inquiry model in New Zealand. Anyone educated in New Zealand? Can anyone relate to the POE model? Okay, it's predict, observe, explain, and sometimes it's POEE. There's another one on top of that, and then evaluate. But students basically make predictions. They create investigation to observe what happens, and then they explain the metrics of what happens in that investigation. So it's very, very similar. When we talk about inquiry-based, as long as you've got those 3 steps, you're sitting down with the student, diagnosing the issue, looking at the misconception. The second step, of course, then is creating a group activity, and the third step is a group discussion where they unpack the solution. So this is what we're talking about. It's a broad summary of what we're talking about this week. And so we introduced the 5 E's, and the 5 E's are a model for us too. You'd probably be quite familiar with the 5 E's too. That's why I've also used that as the core model for this. But what we've got here on the left side is the inquiry model. So it's got 3 distinct stages. You explore, you redescribe, and then you apply. Now, around about week 8, we switch over to Loxley, your second text. And Loxley uses this explore, redescribe, and apply model. So you can see Loxley is very constructivist, and the reason we switch over in year 8 is we start to look at some investigations and classroom applications in some depth. The model we're using is also an inquiry model, the 5 E's, which the first stages go together: explore, engage, and explore. Get students active in their problem. Explain and elaborate. Get them teasing the ideas out, making connections, growing real-world examples and explain. And then get them to evaluate, get them to predict how this knowledge might apply to new and different situations. So inquiry, don't get confused. It's really only got 3 stages, but there are many, many pedagogical models it will take. And the 5 E's is the one that we're looking at because it's the basis of primary connections. It's the basis of science by doing. And it's also the basis of the Australian curriculum science. So that's the rationale for doing that. The image of the child. Did anyone notice that here's a course on science and I'm slapping it full of poetry? Was anybody a bit thrown by that? Why do you think that I've done that? Who's going to take a risk and make a suggestion? It's not rocket science. Why do you think we're looking at poets in a course on science teaching? Well, let's go to the source and have a look. Here's the Moodle. We'll open it up. And for those of you who haven't been in yet, a little course on where to go. There's the weekly structure. We've got the assessment comes first and theoretical perspectives. We go in here, there's a brief description of what we're on about, and down here is the ebook. Now, when I get into the ebook, I start talking about the image of the child. And it's the second example where we start to introduce poets like Robert Bly. And the reason we do this is to talk about, and Dennis Goodrum, who founded the ACS, is a big fan of this, is to look at the way that science reduces our learning lens. You know, and when we teach science as content, we're missing out on awe, we miss out on wonder, we miss out on the linguistic richness of a world of beauty. I mean, these are the things that poets bring back to us. And Robert Bly is just a brilliant Minnesota poet who talks about education and what happens to children. And he talks about it as, you know, what school does, it builds a bag for each child. And then what teachers do and classmates do is they slowly slice off a piece of that beautiful energy ball of a child. And that child learns through the socialization process to drop it in the bag, drop it in the bag, drop it in the bag. So that by the time they get to, as that little section there says, by the time they get to their early 20s, they meet another person of the opposite sex or same sex or whatever, and they fall head over heels in love with that person who's also dropped so much in the bag. And instead of these two people meeting as whole people, they meet as very, very small fragments of what a real person can be. And he blames the education system. It's a radical position. He says, but this is what we do in education. We reduce our students to the norm. An interesting position. I throw in there Alice Miller too. Alice Miller is a psychologist and talks about children and young people as infants trailing clouds of glory. A really rich analysis, and what schooling does and what life does is actually strips it from them. And then I throw in this article here on the Brisbane Times, which indicates that in prep and year 1 and year 2, and here's a scary statistic, most of the sexual assaults in schools occur at year 2 level. It's a really scary statistic, isn't it? The Brisbane Times article shows us that, you know, suspensions and expulsions in prep year 1 and year 2 are at an all-time high. So what do? Do we burn down schools? You know, do we say these are, you know, harmful to children? In fact, you know, we don't. What we do is we enrol in a teacher education course and we change the way teaching is done. And a couple of little points go down here. I talk about Aristotle and De Anima. Henry Moore is also another advocate here. John Locke. We go through a little bit of history just to show that we're not plucking the ACS off the shelf. That, you know, these poets, these people, these innovative thinkers existed in society, and somehow what floated to the surface as science and science teaching was not the rich undercurrent that it was meant to be. In fact, when we look at the Australian Education Act, the very first Education Act founded in Sydney, it was actually governed to keep Catholic children off the street. Really interesting, isn't it?
Colin, I'm sorry to interrupt. The next, you're reading, Reconceptualizing the Child, the link was broken to that one. Was
it really? And yes. Is it still broken? Because I've actually put an alternate link down here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that one. Okay.
No, not a problem. Great question. So no one else will make that mistake now, thanks to you. Just try that now while we're online and make sure it works. You are worth waiting for, Sarah. Is it working all right? I know it works on my machine. I'm just keen to know that it works on yours, because that means I've got to get in there and work out why that link might be faulty. Now, it's a very, very good article. It's a little bit heavy, linguistically dense and conceptually dense. But Marek Tesser is an early childhood educator. And he talks about how power interacts on the body of small children. It's a little bit sinister. And his conclusion very much is, you know, reminiscent of the Matrix, that these children live in a schooling system. That schooling system interacts on their bodies. People control those interactions through the tasks they set these children. And in the end, the child has a choice to conform and comply or to rebel. And most children will actually conform because it seems like the easiest thing to do. We ask ourselves at that point, wonderful perspective, Tessa, great perspective. But is that really learning? Is that what we want our children to do? You know, to actually, is this what we call learning? And perhaps it's not. Sarah, can I just check, did that article open for you? Oh, I've got quiet here. Is anybody else still online? Do we still have audio?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Thank you so much. I just need to know that. Not a problem.
Yes, sorry, it's Sarah. Yeah, I'm still trying to get there. Sorry.
Let me know, Sarah. I'll email you if you can't get it. I'll email it to you directly after this session. So you.
Colin,
Yeah.
the alternative link is working, but the first link isn't.
Lovely. Thanks, Kylie. I'll get in there and fix that immediately after this session. Thank you. Now, Havel is the model used by Tessa. He basically says that, you know, essentially children are living in a matrix. Now, in schooling, too often we get the Education Queensland view. Schooling is a bureaucratic process. You know, there's a NAPLAN test to do every 2 years. There's standardised teaching. Students have got evidence. There's one school, believe it or not, a sinister little model where every student's data, or even in their connection with parents, all live through one school. You know, who could have predicted such an ominous scenario that our whole education system was tied to one computer and one computer software network? So it's, you know, a really scary situation we live in. So we have people like Marek Tessa exploring this as educators and saying, you know, do we need to backtrack a little bit, not get rid of it, but blend it, come up with more humanistic approaches. And so Gregson talks about the many perspectives that we have to consider. And he puts in on his in his text, and I'll just show you the. I'll do it manually. No, I won't. And just on the next page, we go to some of the perspectives that come up for debate. And the table is 2.1 on Gregson, and you can actually access it in your text as well, where Gregson does a really nice analysis on where education has come from, you know, the theoretical models, which is topic number 1. It talks about behaviourism, cognitivism, humanism, social constructivism, and Vygotsky's in there, which is great. Michel Foucault, Carlo Freire, Abraham Maslow, all of these really interesting people go through who the theorists are, right through to how the role and the teacher. Now, that's a useful summary, but it's historic. Okay, that model actually stops around about 1987 because computing and technology started to interact with the system then, and we have new models now like socio-constructivism. We have connectivism from George Siemens and a few new exciting learning models. So when we look at this table, bear in mind, it's a nice summary, but it's historic. So enjoy it and get to know it, but don't place too much store in it because really it's quite an old model. Now, throughout the web pages, I've actually sprinkled some great YouTube clips from some educators who are saying there's a lot wrong with science teaching. And here's where our poets come in. They tell us what's wrong. They tell us we need to bring the heart back into science teaching. And I think one of the poets I cited there, David White, has a wonderful quote on the next slide. I went back into poetry. David is a zoologist, worked on the Galapagos Islands. Brilliant man. I went back into poetry because I felt like scientific language wasn't precise enough to describe the experiences that I had in the Galapagos. Science, rightly, is always trying to remove the I, but I was really interested in the way that the I deepened the more attention you paid to it. And here we have the principle of inquiry. Not just what is science, but what is my relationship to science? What is my relationship to the world? And this is what the Australian curriculum is trying to achieve. Shift that focus to relationships. And of course, you'll know in the assessment, we've got 3 priorities, 3 cross-curriculum priorities too, that we're including in our first assessment item. So it's about not only the relationship to science and to your community, but to Asia, to Indigenous and Torres Strait cultures, and also to the sustainability of the planet. So it's a really bold attempt. And the Australian curriculum needs poets to make it rich, to inspire learners to step out of that cognitive science framework. And as John O'Donoghue says, the magnificence of beauty can transcend banality. And so what we've got to do is find the aesthetic things like poetry, fiction, good film, theatre, drama, dance and music, actually awaken that inside you and remind you there is a huge interiority within you. And this is the connection that we want science to make in children's lives. Going on throughout the material, we come to Bloom. Now, everyone's probably familiar with Bloom, I would hope. This is Bloom Revised. And we talk in the material about how Bloom's taxonomy is a useful way of taking students into deeper stages of learning. Now, in assessment tasks, here's really, we've got our 5 E's laid out for us here, where we get them to remember what they know. We get them to construct their understandings. And they do that and they present their understandings to us, stages 1 and 2. We then apply that. We put application to that and tease it through in a real world concept so that we can actually start to deconstruct how that applies. We analyse where it breaks down and where it works. We identify the misconceptions. And then through the processes of evaluation and recreation, we reconstruct that student, or we help that student to reconstruct their knowledge base. Over here, we've got the stages implemented for us, from the lower stage of remembering and a couple of activities that you might do in a classroom, which involve some ICTs: understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating, creating. So please have a look at that material. Bloom's figures very heavily in assessment task number 1 and also very heavily in assessment task number 2. So it is a useful point of call in your first week. And one of the final things I finish in the activities with is children's movies. And you know, they're responsible for so many inaccuracies in the science world. And there's noise in space. How about that? It's an interesting one. So Star Trek and Star Wars fans, you know, you're guilty. There's laser firing in space. But really, Ripley Scott had it right. In space, no one can hear you scream. It's a silent space. So in Armageddon, the movie, space explosions are deafening. I love that. C-3PO, you know, he's just created the rumour mill of so many wrongful science. The probability of navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,270 to 1. He's wrong. It's actually a million to 1. So it's you know, quite a different statistic. You can hold your breath forever, and we've seen this in the Phantom Menace. Titanic, even though I enjoyed it, you know, got a bit teary. Gravity, again, you can hold your breath forever. He's going to hit the laser with his sword. Now, I love that in Star Wars, but I never question it. Alien computers run Windows. It's an interesting one. And if you're moving in space, you will not stop if your engines get blown up. Okay, it doesn't matter what Star Trek says or the Voyage Home may tell you, you will not stop when your engines get blown up in space. The baddie in James Bond films Die Another Day. It has gene therapy to replace his DNA and change his appearance. It doesn't quite work that way. And an interesting one, a 9mm bullet weighs less than 12 grams. If it's travelling at 400 metres a second, which is about the right speed, it will knock an 80-kilogram man backwards at around 3 centimetres per second. So often when you see people getting shot on the screen and then shot again, and they deliver a few more poignant lines, they get shot again, they hug and do a short dance routine with their lover, they get shot again, and eventually they lie down on one knee and die. Quite questionable science. And it's great, you know, if you take a Mythbuster approach to your science class, you can have an awful lot of fun. So to summarise, okay, inquiry, 5 stages. And in there, the teacher is expected to do different things. Students are expected to perform a certain role. And the aim is that we go through a process of starting from a misconception through to an elaboration of learning. Anybody want to comment on that inquiry approach in world record time? I mean, it's there in the module for you. Anybody got a question about it? Something they'd like to add or explore, an example where you've used the 5 E's model with great effect even would be a wonderful thing to throw in here. The strong silent type, I'd enjoy that. So let's get you vocal then. We'll take you to your assessment tasks and see if we can't get you talking a little bit about this. So this is our first look at them. Who's been online and had a look at them? Someone to basically say, it seemed clear or it seems foggy. Who would like to throw the first line out?
Hi, it's Sarah. I felt a little bit foggy. I've printed it off. My understanding is that we have a look at the units of study, pick a year level, go through the unit of study that we would like to do, and then pick one of those research topics. Am I on the right track?
Sarah, it's like you wrote it.
Oh, I wish I did. Can you pass me now?
No, that you are spot on. Now, let's look at the Patientcrucian. I mean, let's do it. You mentioned a list of research topics, and there's 10 of them there. I've only put 3 up. And as you can see, they're quite complex. The world is complex and ever-changing. Okay, I guess you just accept that. This is the context behind the question. Each day, what counts as knowledge is challenged by new knowledge and process consideration. Yeah, we know the shelf life of knowledge is now only a couple of weeks, and it's doubling every year. Using your selected ACS unit of study, so you pick one from the library, you're absolutely right, Sarah. Present a researched argument to support the claim that inquiry learning is the keystone to developing deeper science understanding in today's science classroom. Wow, there's a bit in that. Select a unit, present a researched argument to support the claim. So you're arguing in favour of inquiry learning as a key way to developing deeper science understandings in today's science classrooms. All right, so you're right. You pick the topic, you pick the unit, you identify the age level. The unit will have written within it the strand descriptions and the elaborations. So you'll know who you're focusing on, what you're focusing on, and what the elaborations of that focus are. From there, you get to know the unit. And you're going to see how well that particular unit uses the inquiry process to support this question, to create deeper understandings. So where do we find out about deeper understandings? Bloom's taxonomy. We look at how that unit unpacks or illustrates the principles of deeper learning espoused in Bloom's taxonomy. And when you look at a unit, there's going to be 3 distinct stages. There's the engage stage where the teacher is trying to identify students' misconceptions. Because let's face it, when you go out to teach something, you don't just go out and teach it. You actually work out, first of all, what it is people don't understand. They may be understanding 70% of it, but then there's 25% of it that's grey and 5% of it simply is misunderstood. That 30% represents your content. That 5% represents your assessment. So we can be as dogmatic about it as that. Second question, third question. So the questions are deliberately quite long. They give you a context, which is a lead-in. And you can see that the second question actually is relating to this week's work. There exists a range of different theories and theorists: behaviourism, cognitivism, humanism, constructivism. I've already mentioned they're quite dated. Used to describe learning in science classrooms. These theories belong to certain periods in time. Okay, they do, because they're dated. And arguably do not serve the needs of today's learners as well as they once did. Oh, that's contentious. There must be an issue here. There's your issue statement. From your selected ACS unit of study, identify what role technology could play in enriching student learning. So that's the focus. When you're analysing your unit, you're looking at the role technology does play and potentially the role it could play, what extensions you could make. So be sure to consider your pedagogical approaches as well as assessment strategies. So in the unit, you don't have to come up with new assessment strategies. They're already there in the unit. What you're looking at is how you can apply pedagogy or technological pedagogy or digital pedagogy to those assessment strategies to enrich the learning. Or if you think they're really good examples, show how it's done and explain why. So you can see the topics are quite deep and challenging. So your choice of question is really important. You know, it's got to be something that you engage with. And then you've got to find a unit that you think is going to be a really good vehicle for you to explore that topic. So you're right, Sarah, it's an important choice, and you're spot on with your interpretation of what to do. Your response, and we're all going to be writing the same way. We're all going to be doing a thing called a Patientcrucian. Anyone done one before? I'd love to hear Patientcrucian stories. Anyone done one?
To tell you the truth, Colin, I didn't even know what it was.
That's a really honest comment, Kylie. Anyone else totally unfamiliar with the Patientcrucian?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
same.
Yeah,
Yep.
me as well.
Yeah, me too.
The same.
Fabulous. Thank you, Maxine. Well, look, you guys are in for a treat. There are Patientcrucian clubs and conventions all around the world. And the whole purpose of the Patientcrucian is you've got 20 by 20 slides, 20 slides by 20 seconds. And the skill in it is doing something that is visual as well as intellectually stimulating. So you are manipulating image as much as you are manipulating content. And it's controversial because you've got a science unit. And we saw one of those questions, for instance, talked about assessment and technology. So one of the first things I would do is go out and identify all the assessment stages in that unit and have a look at what technologies are being used. And then I would follow this kind of suggestion that I've got here to do my Patientcrucian, which actually looked at those assessment items and how technology can enhance them even more in the unit than they currently are. And I'd probably throw in some stuff there about higher order learning, about connectivism as a more modern theory of learning, and talk about the digital world and, you know, the opening up of the classroom, all of those wonderful things that technology allows us to do. So when I'm looking at a Patientcrucian, I mean, the first thing I try to do is visualize it. So what am I going to do? Is the first thing I'm going to need to do is introduce a topic. And I can allow myself probably as many as 2 slides for that. This is just a suggestion. This is not a recipe. This is just a suggestion. And you may find your own way of doing a Patientcrucian, which is way sexier than this. But, you know, you really want to cover your bases. So you're going to cover your topic. Its place in science education. What, you know, basically why you pick the topic. You do some context around that topic. You find some images. You tell a little bit of a story. And that's essentially what a Patientcrucian is, an informed story. Then you've got your theoretical underpinnings. If you're looking at a unit, for instance, on gum trees, which Primary Connections have just released a beautiful unit on gum trees, theoretical and pedagogical connections to that particular unit. So how much is technology being used, at what stages, and in what ways? And you would illustrate it. Then you look at the classroom application, okay? And classroom application, again, would extend what that task was doing, what it was trying to deliver, what sort of assessment outcomes were the focus. And then you'd move on to your 5th set of slides, where you may talk about some extensions. So there may be 5 assessment items in the unit you're looking at, or 5 assessment stages. You may only pick 3 of them and explore them and say, this is how technology can enhance that even more. And this is the thing about a Patientcrucian. There's no right answer. What you're doing is telling a story. If you're going through and you identify 5 points of assessment, and then over in this slide number 5, you start to identify 3 that can be enhanced using technology, that's great. That's perfect. Because what are you showing there? You are showing discrimination. Okay, what we often do with our assessments, we get in there and we write everything about everything, like everything's equally as important. The Patientcrucian actually strips that down. It says, here's my topic. What's important about that in science? What's important about that in pedagogy? What's important about how that looks in the classroom? How can I change and improve that? And ultimately, why is that a good thing to do? What does the theory tell me, and the supporting theory tell me is a good thing about this? Why would I do it? And so essentially we've got there a very pictorial approach to the Patientcrucian. And the reason I throw it in at this stage is because some people are wondering, well, okay, you know, 20 by 20, how do I start? You know, and you start by taking control of it, sort of saying to yourself, here's how I imagine this is going to look. It may look very different in the end, but this is one way of starting your process of capturing that exploration. I'm going to open for comments or questions. It's okay, it's raining here in Townsville. I don't really want to go outside. Does that help people to visualise it?
It has helped a bit. Sorry, Nicole here. It's helped a little bit. I'm still a bit overwhelmed with exactly, I think it's going to be very challenging to pinpoint exactly what information it is. And I also have to admit, I haven't looked at the units yet either. So knowing what information is contained in the unit that I have to work with as a base from too.
Yeah.
That's something I need to start with.
Absolutely, and that's what we're here for. We're here to help you start to work out how you're going to start, and that's a really honest appraisal. It's a great place. Have a look at your unit. I mean, obviously pick the topic. If you're unsure what you think the topic's asking, email us. Bring it up in your tube, okay? Or put it on the discussion board. But email me. Say, look, this is what I think's going down here. Can you add anything to this? How close am I? Am I warm, hot, cold? And look, I'll get straight back to you. Okay, and let you know whether you're warm, hot, or cold, or you could look at this, or you could look at that. But I generally find that with Patientcrucian, when you pick a topic and you think about how you're going to do it, you're pretty spot on because there's no right answer. You actually define the topic, and even though we give you the topic, you interpret what it means, and then you select the unit you want to apply it to, and then you select the parts of that unit that you want to work on. So you can't be wrong. You're in charge. Anybody else feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, it's Jackie, Colin.
Hi, Jackie.
So, say if your topic was, recycling or something like that. So, you would do your topic slides about recycling, and then you'd have to explain where that is in the curriculum. Like, is that where number 2 comes in, that you would have to try and explain where that comes into science education?
That is the process, Jackie. But look, what I'd really like to point to is, oh, sorry, gone the wrong way. You're given 10 topics on the question sheet on the assessment information sheet, and you are expected to choose one of those.
Okay.
Yeah, and those 10 topics all belong to weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the course. So that they're present in all of those weeks. And so that's the reason why we sort of say, pick your topic first. Then have a look and select an appropriate unit that you think this topic. I can explore technology, and a really good unit for me to do might be this biology unit. And so you can actually select that and get stuck into it. So you go through that unit, you'd identify all the assessment and all the stages where they use technology and why they use it. So then you'd think about that in the process of your learning as you go through the course and sort of say, oh yeah, well, they're using technology, but there are other ways they can use technology that may enhance student learning even more. And then that becomes the second part of your Patientcrucian. Okay, here's how they do it. Here's how they could do it, and here's why they should do it that way, that final stage. So the Patientcrucian, and when I go to this diagram, is presented as a circle because it begins with the topic and it comes back to the topic. And in that process, you've taken that topic, shown its place in science, you've looked at the pedagogical issue you're looking at, or theoretical issue. It could be assessment, it could be technology, it could be engagement. You're looking at how that applies in the classroom, and you talk about it. You've got 20 seconds for a couple of slides. Not long. So what you're doing is presenting good, focused information. You're not wasting words. And over here we've got classroom application, where you're looking at how we could change it, how we could...
Hello, I'm trying to do a lecture for uni. I'll have to hang up. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, that's great. And classroom application, basically how this would change if you were looking at engagement, for instance, what you could do for a few engagement activities to add value to the unit, and why that will make it a better unit, why you would do that. And then, therefore, you come back to the topic. So it's meant to be a circular, what we call an expository model. The Patientcrucian will begin from an obscure topic and come back to that topic, and everybody will feel satisfied and informed. That's the goal. So this assessment task, we give you 10 topics, and we give you several units you can choose from. You can come up with your own if you want. And then it's a matter of you starting to identify the key parts of that unit that you can explore and extend. Any other comments or questions people would like to ask about that particular one? I mean, I'm raising this in week 1 so that we can get some really good discussion about this, that you will email me, that we will put things on discussion boards so that there's no mystery around this. When we go into assessment, we may be wondering the detail about what we're doing, but we're confident in the process of why we're doing it and what it is we're trying to do. And, let's have a look at that as we go through. Assessment task number 2, and you'll notice the Patientcrucian is technology driven. It's many of the core standards, graduate standards for teachers here in Queensland require you to demonstrate technological capabilities and also communication capabilities using technology. So for that reason, we try to steer our assessment towards those communicative competences. That you can actually put a portfolio together that's going to contain some digital competencies as well as some visual and digital art competencies in the Patientcrucian. So, and they're quite biting pieces. I mean, a lot of science symposiums are done using Patientcrucian these days, so it's a really accepted method. The assessment task number 2 is digital cards. Now, what I'm going to do instantly is just leave that there and allow you to ask me some questions about it. What do you want to know about this particular task?
What are digital task cards?
Okay.
How?
Right, now there's no one answer to that. A digital task card, in this assessment task, we actually ask you, it's got to be printable. So you may use a range of software as long as it can be printable, because when we look at the task, you've got to produce 2 of them, one for an older student group and one for a very younger student group. So what we're doing is we're looking at digital technologies in science for upper primary and perhaps early childhood. So what we're doing is we're demonstrating our skills there as teachers in applying the pedagogy at different levels of learning. So a digital card essentially is something that can be printed. So it can be a web page, and you can then present a Word document which can be printed from that web page, and that becomes your digital card that you can hand to a learner so that they've got the digital instructions as well. Because let's face it, when you're working with very young people, the chance to do something online is quite limited. You know, there's instructions. You should use many more visual instructions than you do written ones. There's a whole range of principles that would govern how you would teach to young people online. And I mean the prep year 3 classroom. So, and then we've got the 0 to 5. Again, you'd be using digital cards there that are largely pictorial. So there's no one answer to what it might look like, but the answer is it's got to be printable. So that's basically what I'll say at that part. Now, this task consists of 2 parts. Part A, a professional literature review, where you're looking at 2 alternate pedagogies for science teaching. So you may be using play-based learning in the 0 to 5 group. You may be using the 5 E's in the year 6 card that you're going to produce. So you'll produce a literature review which explores those 2 pedagogies and justifies your choice and describes how you're going to use them. Part A, relatively simple. Part B, well, not simple, it's quite a complex task because you need to know and demonstrate your knowledge. It's a demonstration task, and it's always hard to demonstrate well. It's a challenge. And it's word limited to 1,000 words, Part A, so you can't waffle on. You've basically got to get out there and identify your pedagogies and identify the year level you're using them and identify why you're doing that, give your pedagogical rationale. And so Part B is where you produce two cards. And we can see here that it's a digital card, something that can be printed. And the goal is to scaffold independent learning in science by small groups of children. So your card, for instance, may be used as an extension activity. It may be used as a jigsaw activity. It may be used as a small group activity of some sort.
So it's basically a resource. So creating a resource to use.
Absolutely, Nicole. And that's another wonderful way of describing it. Yeah, it's a resource. And it is in digital form, but can be converted through the printing process into a card. That's the key. So what we're looking at here is how teachers use technology. And if most of you have taught in Education Queensland schools, you know that the classroom technology available is generally quite low level. So we're not talking about high-end technologies here, although there are some schools with great high-end capacity. But by and large, most of us are talking about a Windows-based computer with a printer, and therefore that opens up to a range of limited applications that we can possibly use. You may build a Weebly site, you may build a wiki site, you may build some web repository that you can give your students a password to, because let's face it, safety is a big issue in this assessment item too with digital cards. And they can go to your teacher, Weebly, and they can download their digital card and get on with their work. So in looking at the digital cards, we also talk about a thing called flipping the classroom. Now, who's heard of flipping the classroom before?
Yes, I have.
Nicole, would you be brave enough to offer us an interpretation of what that means?
So how I use flipping the classroom is basically presenting a question, which might be the topic for the day, back to the students and asking them, what do they know about this? And if you don't know something about this, where can you find the information? Getting them to do a bit of research and then maybe present back to each other to kind of teach each other rather than me teaching them, because they tend to learn a little bit more effectively than just listening.
I love that. Thank you. That's brilliant. And in the course, I introduced you to Russell Stannard, who gained a lot of notoriety as a strong advocate of flipping the classroom. And the reason why I introduced him to him is because he's got a free teacher video page where you can learn a lot about flipping the classroom. But what it does, it creates affordances of time and technology. So you can create a digital card, give it to your students the day before you want to start teaching that concept. And as Nicole said, they can go home, they can explore it, and they can do their lower level Bloom's work, working out the concepts that you want to discuss with them in the class the next day. So what you do is you're flipping it, you're putting time outside the classroom so that when they come into the classroom, you're not doing basic conceptual work. What you're doing is you're in the zone of proximal development. You're in the constructivist zone the minute they walk in the room, and they all start from that equal point because they've completed their digital cards. So it's a brilliant explanation. Thank you. And so that's the scenario for assessment task 2, where we're completing digital cards, which are going to give us as teachers an opportunity to have more classroom time with our students, because we're taking that basic initial engagement stage, that Bloom stage, we're downloading that to our students for homework or out of class work. So your task here is to produce 2 of those, one for a very young 0 to 5 or very old 7 to 9 primary, and another one for a prep to 3. So everyone will do a prep to 3, and then depending if you're early childhood, you do 0 to 5. If you're primary, you'll do 7 to 9. So just to demonstrate your capabilities and the virtuosity of your skills at different classroom levels. Does that help explain the context of those 2 assessment items? And
Hello.
why? Yes.
Just a comment on the digital task cards. Is there any element in there that we can add for kids that don't necessarily have access to computers at home?
That's why they're printable, Kylie, and you've hit it spot on. You've hit it spot on, because we're talking about some, here in Townsville, we have certain suburbs where, there's one computer to 27 kids in a school. So what we need is a teacher who can access a computer and print off this digital card for the students. And kids may be able to log into an external site themselves with a password given by the teacher, and they can sit down and do this with their parents. So it's another way of extending, engaging the classroom. But yes, this is why it must be printable. Even though it's digital, the key qualification here is it's printable. Yeah, so great question. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I know we've covered a lot of turf tonight. My aim is to A, challenge you, but B, also motivate you, because you're all really good students. To get to this stage, you're more than capable for this course, and you will nail these assessment tasks and do a wonderful job. You will. You got to this stage, and these certainly will challenge you at times, but you're more than capable of meeting this challenge. The key thing here is talking about how we're going to work together. So use the questions, use the discussion boards, email me, make me work. That's what I'm here for. If you get a chance to go along to a face-to-face tutorial, do. If you want to start forming online groups and study groups, do. Okay, get all these things going. Let me know, and I'll help wherever I can and whatever I can do to make this task easier for you, because we don't need to work harder, we need to work smarter. That's the kind of process we need as teachers. And that's our professional competency, thinking on our feet. So it's really important that we develop some of those skills now. We've covered a lot of territory tonight. Some of the YouTube videos I've put up hopefully will make you giggle, and hopefully will bring to life some of the importance of the message. And we're talking here about world-class teachers like Danny Doucette, But essentially what they're saying in very exciting ways is the same thing that the poets I've thrown into this first week are saying in very traditional ways. Let's excite, let's engage, let's create that awe, that wonder that we need for students to take their place in a science classroom in a meaningful way, in a way that is going to make them, as Piaget said as back as far as 1962, it's going to make them scientists in their own world. And I quote, and I'll finish here with John O'Donoghue, who says strongly that we are all artists. Okay, a quote he borrowed from Picasso. And everything we do, even when we dream, that's a creative product that we're doing. So let's bring creation into science. At the top of Bloom's taxonomy, let's make create the ultimate higher order process. Okay, because that's where it belongs. And this is just not me talking. This is, again, the whole purpose of putting this module together for the week is to demonstrate just the richness of the depth of this kind of thinking. There is the science by doing, and it springs on deliberately just to alert you, keep you awake. And a couple of tasks here for you to consider. The behaviourist task, and ultimately getting down to the end of week 1. I've said on these activities, if you are time pressed in a week, select which ones you'll do and which ones you won't. Be strategically negligent. You got to where you are by being intelligent. If you're time poor, you've got assessment in other subjects, have a look at these activities and actually think, okay, I'm going to pick this one because, to be honest, that's what I need to do for my assessment task. That I really need to focus on this, and then just let the others go. I mean, I've put up more than enough material here to extend a lot of different thinking. You don't have to do it all. It's lovely if you can, but do what suits you. And if you're stressed, shoot me an email and say, look, give me the 3 take-home tasks this week. What do I need to do? And I'll be honest with you, I'll give you the 3 things that would be worth your while doing. Okay, even though they're all useful, some are there for fun, some are there to extend, and some are there just to enrich. But some of them are strategically really, really important, the ones that I think, you really could do and should do. On that note, I will ask for any further questions before I shut this down and save it. I'll convert it to an MP4 video and launch it on YouTube. And in the left-hand menu of the Zoom sessions under assessment, I will be placing each of these as a recording each week, so you can come back and look at them. Or if you can't make the Zoom session, you know where to find them. Any questions or comments to finish this session?
Thank you, Colin, for tonight. It's been really good. It's Sarah, by the way, sorry.
Thanks, Sarah.
And I've checked my link, and that alternate link does work. So
lovely. I will still get in there and fix that other one, though, so thanks for letting me know again. It's wonderful. Any other questions? Doesn't matter how silly you think it might be.
I have a question about the Patientcrucian. Just sorry to backtrack so much. So on the slides, we need to have our visual representation. What about words?
Yes, definitely. Words are allowed. It's a bit of convention with Patientcrucian. You don't put too many words on, and the words you do put on really count. They belong there.
Okay, so do you have like a ballpark figure of what we might be aiming for?
I'm so glad you asked that, because when we go into, I've actually put some examples up there on the subject website. And try not, I could put 1,000 things up here, but I value your time, so I'm just trying to put something that's going to answer those questions succinctly. So when we get in here, we get into the Patientcrucian, and you will see in there's some examples. Now, I caution you quite strongly, do not repeat those examples. They belong to previous years, and the task was different. So focus on this task. It's very different. An example of flightless birds, and there was one here. Here's a presentation to assist you get started. And I think there was one other example in there too, which shows you how to use images and text. I think it might be that one. So some important information for constructing the Patientcrucian. Now, Nicole, that gives you some recommendations. Sometimes a really effective slide is just one word and some really, really good dialogue. Sometimes it's a picture. Sometimes it's a combination of pictures or a sequence of pictures and words. So you get to be a little bit creative with your design here.
Are we required to reference where we've got the images from?
You are. Now it's 20 by 20, so 20 slides by 20 seconds each. And you are allowed then to add as many slides as you need to reference that.
Okay, brilliant.
So
That's all
yeah,
my questions. Thank you.
great questions, thank you. The references do not count as part of the 2020, they're additional, so you can add additional slides for references. Any other questions that I can help you with tonight? If not, there's such a thing called email. Jump on, send it through to me when you think of it, and I can guarantee I'll get on and answer as quickly as possible.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Does that help? It's Colin.
Sorry. Oh, David, sorry. I was just looking at David White's page.
Oh, the poet. Yes, he's brilliant.
Sorry, it's Rosalind here. I just, with regard to assessment 1, so the words that we use on the slides are different to the voiceover. That's correct?
They don't have to be.
Okay.
I mean, I've actually seen a Patientcrucian done where it had 3 words on one slide, and for 15 seconds the person just repeated those 3 words.
Okay.
And again, the effect was obviously for emphasis, the effect was for impact, and it worked really, really well. So this is the nice thing about a Patientcrucian. 2020 sounds really rigid, but it's a very, very open format for you to be creative and to apply principles of design to do some really interesting work.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Next week, I'll talk about some of the technical issues of putting your Patientcrucian together so that you can anticipate them as you're doing it rather than get stuck after you've done it. So we'll bring that up next week, and some of those are on the Patientcrucian link on the subject webpage too. Hey, look, thank you. I really appreciate your time. Please send me suggestions for what you may want me to look at, and I'll do what I can to incorporate that and adapt what I think we need to look at. So please, I'm here to answer your questions. So if you want something looked at in a certain week, send it through and we'll unpack it and pull it to pieces. In the meantime, good luck. I hope you enjoy the course. Welcome aboard. And at any point, if you need to talk, if you feel like something's slipping out of control, I've been around a long time, so please just give me a call or ask, can we talk? And we can talk about issues. My goal is to get you into this course and through the course, and to have you enjoy it and become excellent science teachers who employ poetry, music, song, dance, and anything that you can get your hands on to teach science and make kids wonder and think. That would be brilliant. Thank you all. And good night.
Thanks, Colin. Good night.